Hello and welcome to the People, Place and Nature podcast. I've been wanting to do this episode for quite a while because when it comes to the environment, things are not always so cut and dry. There's lots of trade-offs that you often need to make. What's more important, for instance? Sustainability, net zero, ecology, water, economics, community, or wider societal benefits? In my work, these come up as conflicts all the time, and it's really important to demonstrate that solutions are simply not that clear-cut. These are especially challenging when you have a project like HS2, the largest infrastructure project in Europe. So to discuss some of these issues, primarily on the ecology side, we're joined by David Prys-Jones, who is the Biodiversity Manager for HS2, to talk about just that. So what are some of the innovations, criticisms and challenges around the project, especially when it comes to tackling and tying in with the natural world? So let's find out. A big thank you to David for his time, and I hope you find this episode as interesting as I did. I hope you've enjoyed the episode so far. Here's a quick message from one of our sponsors. Make sustainability a priority throughout the design process with a suite of tools built specifically for landscape architecture and design. Vectorworks gives you the freedom to follow your imagination wherever it may lead, with remarkably flexible software that integrates BIM for landscape and GIS workflows. Sketch, model, and document in a single tool with the world's most design-centric BIM solution. Discover Vectorworks' landmark and design without limits. Visit vectorworks.net to learn more. Hi David, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really interested in this discussion because obviously we're going to be talking about one of the biggest infrastructure, the biggest infrastructure project in Europe, HS2. So I'm really keen to get your view on all of these things, and yeah, thank you very much for joining us today.
No problem, yeah.
Good. So I think probably first we'll start with what is HS2, because whilst most people are going to know what it is, there may be people that don't actually understand the scale of the project, what it's trying to do. And even myself here, I was always a bit hesitant, thinking, oh, actually, do we really need it? All of this kind of thing.
Yes.
And then I saw some plans and proposals for just the scale of the project.
Yeah.
And it kind of completely changed my view in terms of thinking, actually, this affects much more of the country than we typically talk about. And most people end up just talking about London to Birmingham, which just isn't the case. Yes. So do you want to expand a bit on that?
Absolutely. HS2, as you say, largest infrastructure project in Europe. It is the UK's first rail project north of London in over 100 years. It's the second high-speed rail line that we've got after the Channel Tunnel link. And yeah, it's going to be, when it's completed, a 230-mile long railway that stretches between London up to Birmingham. It provides connections onto the existing line, so it's not just about that new stretch of railway, it's about ensuring that the trains that we have can move onto the existing track. And it's got a few key aims, basically. So the first one is to increase capacity on our rail network. Our rail network is bulging at the seams in terms of the amount of people that use it. It also will provide capacity on our road network, because one of the key things about HS2 is it's not just about the speed of getting from London to Birmingham or Birmingham to London or further out. It's to do with the capacity on the existing line and the road network. So what will be able to be done is we'll be able to move a lot of the freight that's currently carried by road onto the railways once HS2 is in operation, because HS2 will take the bulk of the passenger transport. So we'll be able to basically shift freight around, which will free up road capacity and also obviously have knock-on effects in terms of things like reducing carbon impacts. So it'll help level up the country, which is a phrase which, it's not one of my favourite phrases, but it is a phrase which is applicable to HS2. So it does that, and then of course it provides that really low carbon transport solution. So the idea being that we are net zero by 2035. We'll be using 100% renewable energy when we're running the trains. So we're playing our part in providing that long-term sustainable transport network that the country is desperately in need of, because it hasn't had any investment in that area for quite a long time.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And it's what surprised me as well is I fairly recently moved to Birmingham, and I did live in Birmingham previously, but I'm originally from the south of England, and I didn't realise quite how bad the congestion around some parts of Birmingham is. until I started getting the train here. And for people that don't live in Birmingham, it is a nightmare getting on the train in the mornings in some parts of the city. It really is like sardines on the train, and you've got to sort of literally push people back into the train to be able to get yourself on, which is something I never thought I'd have to do in the UK, really. It seems something that happens in a far off land.
Absolutely.
But these problems are becoming quite significant, and a major part of it is taking, as you say, improving the capacity on like the local lines by taking all the commuter people to London out of the equation. So even just in Birmingham, there's going to be quite a significant benefit once the system's in place.
Definitely.
And another big project is happening in Birmingham, while I'm talking about Birmingham, is the metro project that's happening here. So this is separate to HS2, but that's going to connect much of the Midlands up with HS2 as well. So there's this big metro project taking place. It's already connects Birmingham to Wolverhampton. It's going out towards, I don't know if it's going to Coventry, but it's going out that way, as well as around much of the rest of the city. So there's a lot of other major infrastructure projects that sort of bolt into HS2 to improve its efficiency and bring forward sort of
it's all part of the integrated rail plan that the government launched. So, there's this wider aspiration beyond HS2. HS2 is one component of this. We're playing our part in terms of providing that new network down the spine of the country, as I say. It's a huge undertaking involving a lot of people.
Yeah, that's it. And I mean, this is the trouble with major projects. They do involve a huge number of people, and the costs and resources and things to do it are a challenge. But we did a podcast just yesterday talking about engineering and sustainability. And it's about building in that long-term resilience. I'm going to sound like a bit of a fanboy for HS2 through this, but I am broadly in support of the project. Obviously, it's got challenges and things, but all projects do.
It does.
And my view, to put my cards on the table, is the reality is we need like investment in proper infrastructure that's modern, that can actually plan ahead. Because one of the big criticisms I often see at the moment is people thinking that we're not thinking far enough ahead. And then ironically, we have a project like HS2 which is thinking quite a long way ahead, that doesn't necessarily get the support perhaps it should from people in terms of being able to provide the spine for that transition to more effective public transport and a better connected country, which is what we need to be striving for. But if the spine of it isn't in place, which is the most difficult bit, then everything sort of falls apart.
It does, and I think a project like HS2 is obviously always going to be controversial because it does impact communities, it does impact the landscape, and we'll come on to this later. We are doing a lot in that space, but there's obviously going to be people who live alongside the line of route who don't immediately see any benefit to them because the stations are located quite far away. But again, it's thinking long term, isn't it? We haven't, as I said at the beginning, had any major rail projects north of London in well over 100 years. The country is growing, our economic centres are growing, and we need to find a way to spread the wealth of the country out so that different communities can benefit from it. So I think that's what HS2 brings benefits for and will bring benefits for.
Okay, no, I think that's right.
So
should we touch a bit on cost then? I know it's not your area of expertise,
no, it's not.
There'll inevitably be people commenting or messaging me saying you didn't ask them about the cost of the project.
Yes.
So it's very expensive.
It is expensive, yes. But again, I think it's expensive, but you look at the scale of what we're doing, it's a project that is, as we've said, it's providing this new transport spine up the country. It's providing a rail system that will be benefiting the country for over 100 years once it starts operating. And there is a cost associated with that. And, the costs side of things is complicated because, there are added factors to why costs have increased, which are outside of the project's control. But it is a costly project, but the benefits, the economic case is that the benefits outweigh the costs. So that's what it's based upon.
That's it. I also, again, slightly jumped to the defence of HS2 because while I was sort of doing a bit of background reviewing and watching and reading about sort of more on the project, I came across a very interesting interview. I can't remember who it was with, but with an economist.
Okay.
And he was basically saying that part of the reason why HS2 comes across as so expensive is because it's one project. And he said traditionally, and when we compare it to the continent and places like that, you typically would do a station, a bridge, a line of line, and that would be a specific project in and of itself. So you don't get this mega project which costs many, many tens of billions to implement. you end up with small projects that might be a billion or whatever the figure is, hundreds of millions or however it may be. And that's a very important way to consider HS2, because if you broke it up like that, it's more or less parable. And this is what their words, not mine. It was more or less parable to other major infrastructure projects. So in the context of one giant project, yes, incredibly expensive, but if there were to be individual interventions done, it would be broadly in line with other major projects. It's just we don't look at it that way because we're undertaking it as one major.
Yeah, so the costs are disaggregated, aren't they? So they're split out, aren't they, between, as you say, the different components that go into it. But I think, we're always looking at ways to sort of save costs in the long term. The stations, our track, the rolling stock. As I say, we're looking at net zero carbon ambitions. We're looking at reducing carbon within our embedded steel. Everything is, everything that can be done to make the railway be constructed in the most sustainable way is being done. We have teams who work in-house to do that. But yes, there is a cost attached to it. But
that's it.
Yeah.
Well, this is it. If you want to be sustainable, it requires innovation.
Yes.
A lot of these technologies are emerging, they're new products, so they are inherently more expensive. So, but a project like HS2, because of the scale of it, has a key role to play in sort of helping reduce those costs and hopefully help make it more affordable for future projects to come forward.
and help provide, as you say, the innovation that the industry needs. We are leading the way in terms of lessons learned for other projects. We've got, we've got a number of diesel-free construction sites now. We're trialing diesel, electric-powered site machinery. We're leading the way in terms of innovation on construction projects, which the benefits will be felt on projects subsequently to HS2, I think. So the innovations are huge. Yeah.
So that's interesting. So do you have any more examples of those kind of sort of net zero innovations and stuff that are being trialled as part of the project that you can go into before we start talking more about sort of the
slightly outside my area, but as I say, we have a carbon team who work within HS2. We published our net zero carbon plan last year, which shows how we're going to get to a net zero carbon position by 2035, and outlines how, come operation, 100% of our trains will be using renewable energy. And we've got a number of diesel-free sites, completely diesel-free sites now. And as I say, we've got a number of these sort of electric bits of kit used on site, but it is slightly outside my area, so I don't know any more details than that.
No, that's okay. That's a future podcast.
Yes, I think it is. I think that's the great thing. I think it's the innovations within the different teams of HS2. I work within the Biodiversity natural environment team, but I've got colleagues who are doing amazing things in the space of carbon, in the space of air quality, in the space of noise reduction. They're trialing new noise barriers. There's all sorts of things that are going on HS2, as I say, which will benefit subsequent projects.
Yeah, no, that's great.
So yeah, you should definitely speak to those teams.
Yeah, well, I'd love to. I'll catch up with you after about that and see if you can put me in touch with anyone. Sorry to interrupt, but we have a quick message from one of our sponsors, and it's that we're thrilled to announce that Marshalls is the sponsor of this episode. As the UK's leading supplier of sustainable concrete and natural stone products for the built environment, Marshalls is committed to doing the right things for the right reasons, delivered in the right way, ethically and sustainably. From fairly traded stone to low-carbon concrete bricks, Marshalls believes we can create better spaces, putting people, communities and the environment first. Find out more about the firm's green initiatives in our podcast links below. So let's then go into the environmental side.
Sure.
Well, rather the ecological and environmental side. So you're sort of leading on the biodiversity side of things for HS2.
Yes.
So you have the joyous job of dealing with what we quite often see in the news around sites being impacted and how they're being mitigated.
Yes.
So do we want to talk a bit about some of the controversies that HS2 has had around so ancient woodlands, one of the ones, my background's forestry, I see the ancient woodland ones a lot. I know people that have worked on some aspects of them trying to mitigate the impact, but do you want to explain a bit about what HS2 is doing in those areas?
Sure, yeah. I guess firstly, the key thing to say is that we are no different to any other development project. We abide by the laws that we have in place and the regulations that we have in place to protect wildlife and to protect habitats. All of our work is underpinned by survey work, all of the work that we need to carry out on sites where protected species might be present. We work with Natural England to get licenses. We have teams of ecologists up and down the country, doing the survey work, getting the licenses, monitoring the habitats that we create to make sure everything works. But as you say, building a project like HS2 involves land take. We've designed the route initially. From the very beginning, we designed the route to avoid as many important habitats as we could. But the UK is a country that does have, habitats such as ancient woodlands, which are, particularly important, and there's a number of them, and we do unfortunately impact some of them up and down the line of route. We've done a lot of work in terms of making sure we don't impact them, but also since the assessment stages, we've been looking at ways in which we can reduce those impacts further. So up and down the route, we impact on between phase 1, phase 2A and phase 2B, it's around 40 ancient woodlands that we impact in total. Looking at phase 1, because that's obviously the phase where we've started construction works, we are progressively reducing our impact on those ancient woodlands. So we started off with our initial assessment, there was 32 ancient woodlands we thought we would affect. Since that point, we've reduced that number to 25 ancient woodlands. So we've removed impacts from 7 ancient woodlands completely, and we've cut the total impact in terms of hectareage down by 30%. So we're around 20 hectares that are being impacted now across the entire phase 1 route, which, bearing in mind that phase 1 is, that is a distance of around 135 miles between London and Birmingham. We've done a lot in terms of those reductions. That's not to say that any, it's an irreplaceable habitat. Any impact is not one that anyone would want. But the key here is that we try to reduce those impacts further. And where we can't, we've got a number of measures in place. We compensate, we plant new woodlands, we restore existing woodlands, we salvage material from those woodlands, and also we've done a lot of work in the soil translocation research department, which is, there isn't a huge amount of work that's been done so far on that.
So what is going on in the soil translocation side of things?
So when we first realised we would be impacting ancient woodlands, we realised the sensitivity of these habitats and the irreplaceability of them. So what we have done is we've created a number of standalone ancient woodland strategies. And what these documents do is they outline the bespoke compensation measures that will be used or put in place for each of the woodlands that we impact. One of those compensation measures is the salvage and translocation of ancient woodland soils. So we are sending in teams that essentially remove the soils from the woodlands and translocate them to nearby adjacent sites, if possible, as close as possible, that will knit those woodlands back into the landscape. We make sure that things like the soil chemistry and the pH and the other aspects of the soil biology are as close to matching the donor site as possible. So we make sure the donor and the receptor site are as close as possible in terms of their physical chemistry and geographical location. And we've been translocating those soils, and we've been doing that from the beginning, and we've translocated a large number of ancient woodland soils. Now, there are some woodlands where we've not been able to do it due to, there might be an invasive plant issue. We've had some that got rhododendron. We can't translocate those, but we have translocated a lot in terms of the rest of those woodlands. So we've got, over a dozen sites now where we've got soil translocations have taken place, and we'll monitor those sites going forward to see, as I say, the efficacy of doing it. It's very untested. There's no other project that's done it like we have. There's a couple of other cases of sort of small-scale soil translocations, but what they've not done is monitored them over the long term. And that's the important thing, because ancient woodlands take, as you know, hundreds of years to establish. So we need to make sure that the biota and the soil chemistry and the soil mycorrhizal fungi and all the rest of it is achieving the conditions it needs to mimic the ancient woodland that was lost.
So with this soil translocations, are you also translating trees as well, as well as the soils, or is it mainly sort of trees being removed and soils relocated? Yeah,
so we mostly remove the trees and the vegetation are removed from the surface, but what we do is we've translocated some monoliths. So we've taken some of the standing trees and embedded them on the translocation sites as monoliths, and we've obviously created piles of deadwood using some of the material salvaged from those translocation sites. But the key has been the soil soil translocation work, yeah.
Yeah, and so why is the soil translocation so important? Because a lot of people would think actually the trees are what should be saved and we should be moving the trees. So why is it the soils?
I think this is one of the things that people maybe, one of the misunderstandings when it comes to ancient woodlands. Obviously, the individual trees within the ancient woodlands can be very old and very important, but what makes ancient woodlands a unique habitat is the soil biology. So it's those fungi, those mycorrhizals, there's the bacteria that within the soil. That's what make ancient woodlands the sort of the irreplaceable habitats that they are, and that's one of the things that takes a long time to establish. So we are testing, I guess, that efficacy of translocating them. So we're doing some really interesting work currently with a couple of companies that specialize in eDNA surveys. So we take DNA samples of the soil over time, basically to track how those soils develop and see if they are mimicking the soils that we've removed. So yeah, we've got a number of control sites that we're looking at currently for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then are there any other sort of major habitats that are being impacted that you're doing a similar kind of work on as well?
Ancient woodlands are the only irreplaceable habitat so far that we've impacted. Obviously, irreplaceable habitats, there are others that are up and down the country, and some guidance is being published later this year which should outline any other irreplaceable habitats, but that's not yet appeared. So they are the key habitat that we're working on, but as I said at the beginning, we are like any other development project. We have lots of areas of grassland in particular. If you think about the line of route that we pass through a lot of farmland, a lot of grassland, a lot of non-ancient woodlands. We have lots of woodland planting going in as mitigation for the removal of non-ancient woodlands. So the project as a whole is planting on phase 1 alone 7 million trees and shrubs as our sort of mitigation response to the removal of some of those non-ancient woodlands, which equates to an area of about 9 square kilometres of new woodland that we're putting in as a response to those losses. So yeah. And
this new woodland, is that primarily along the edge of the line, or is it more in the locality of the lines that makes, or a bit of a mix of both?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mix of both. So, again, like other development projects, we have a boundary which which our works allow us to operate within, and our mitigation work, that covers both the footprint of the railway and the hard infrastructure, but also our mitigation sites. So that's been designed over time by teams of expert ecologists and environmentalists to ensure that what we're putting in knits into the wider landscape. So if we're removing a woodland because our line goes through it, then we will create a bigger area of woodland in an area that connects to the landscape. It's following the Lawton Review principles of bigger, better, more joined up. That's what we're doing, as well as looking at things like historic landscape, because it's not just ecology that we've got to think about. We've got to think about how the landscape looks or how the landscape has been over time. We don't want to, because we're a linear project, we don't want to cut through that landscape and change the way it looks. So we need to blend in essentially into the landscape as much as possible. There's a good line that I heard recently, which was, HS2 is fundamentally an environmental project that just so happens to have a railway running through it. The amount of mitigation planting work that we're doing is staggering, to be honest, along the line of route. So yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. So on that sort of landscape scale then, obviously we're looking at a lot of big interventions, new woodland planting, all of these kind of things. What other types of landscape scale intervention are you doing? Obviously they'll be replacing grasslands and things, but do you have any case studies of sort of major interventions that are taking place? Because you must be impacting rivers and things as well as part of the programme.
Yeah, so I think probably on phase 1 obviously is the phase where we've started construction, and that's probably got the best case study on it, which is the work that we're doing at the Colne Valley. So that's on the edge of the Chilterns. So at an area which just before you enter into the Chilterns Tunnel, which is a 10-mile tunnel that basically passes underneath the Chilterns, avoiding that area of outstanding natural beauty. We've got a large area called the Colne Valley Western Slopes, which is a 130-hectare site. And what we're planning on doing there is essentially turning it into a chalk grassland. So we're excavating a lot of material as the works for that tunnel, a lot of chalk material, which we're then putting into the landscape to create this new chalk grassland. So it's going to be around 130, 140 hectare site of new wetlands, grasslands, woodlands, And the idea being that this is a site which will be managed through low impact conservation grazing. We're going to trial rewilding techniques on it because of the size of it. You know, we are constrained on some of our sites because we're a linear project. You know, there are certain sites where I'd love to sort of do a bit more, use some of these techniques that are coming through to do with rewilding and as I say, conservation grazing. But this site in particular, on the edge of the Chilterns, allows us to trial that, which is really exciting, and we're doing it in partnership with other groups. So the local authority and the Wildlife Trust and others have been involved in that as well, which is the benefits of partnership working.
And have you found that people are receptive to that? Because obviously there's been a lot of criticism from groups like the Woodland Trust, Wildlife Trusts, and rightly so, about the various impacts that project's having. But are you finding they're sort of getting a bit more involved now in the enhancement work? So they're a bit more, now that they've seen the range of sort of interventions that you're trying to implement, are they sort of turning around a bit and being more supportive of aspects of the project?
I think we're coming at this from different directions fundamentally, and we are doing what we can to work with these groups, and we're making progress with them. I think what we will find is that as the evidence starts to emerge in terms of what's being done on the ground, I think we've been working in a theoretical space for a long time, without the actual habitat creation works on site for people to see and actually see the scale of what we're doing. It's been quite hard, I guess, to bring some of these stakeholders alongside us. But we are making progress with those groups, and we regularly speak to them. We've got a group called the Ecology Review Group, which people like the Woodland Trust, the Wildlife Trust, National Trust, and also Natural England, Forestry Commission, and the other stat boards they sit on, and also local authorities. And we bring that group together and we discuss the monitoring of our sites in the long term. We discuss how we can get the best out of these sites. They suggest methods which we might want to use, and the idea being that we allow these groups to see all of our monitoring data and comment on what we're doing. In the long term, I would love it if we can work in partnership with these groups, and we can perhaps look to return some of these sites that we've created to them. HS2 is not a project. We don't want to own land in the long run. We want to make sure that these sites are managed and maintained properly, and the groups best to do that will be the NGOs. So I'm really keen that we work more closely with them. There's work to be done in that space, but I think there's lots of opportunity. I think that's the buzzword here, is there's opportunities. I think that's what HS2 brings.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting way to look at it. That was my next question, really, was around the management side. Yeah. So obviously the management will vary depending on the habitat, but the long-term view of how it's going to be maintained in perpetuity is obviously a major query, because we need to make sure that it's publicly accessible and obviously managed with biodiversity and stuff in mind long term. Yeah. So if that's the plan, then that's, I think, the right way to. It is.
I think we can end up sometimes a bit fixated on what we're creating. Quite often on any project, you think about what's being created in the first place. But for me, the real importance is how that's managed and maintained in the long run. There's no point in creating something if it doesn't maintain that condition, if it degrades or if it's not looked after. And we have some processes in place to ensure that it doesn't happen. Long-term land management, effective land handback to landowners. Ideally we get the landowners to take it back. Will they want to take it back? Some of them might, some of them might not, but we need to have the process in place to ensure that that land is given back to the right people, managed in the right way for the right duration. So yeah, that's the key in that space. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, this is the big challenge that I often foresee on these projects is actually, any ecological project, even just general development projects, is actually, are these things going to be looked after in the long term? And that's obviously a big thing that Biodiversity Net Gain is looking to apply, is make sure that the management is in place for 30 years at least as a minimum. Yes. But obviously your project is slightly different, so you're looking at more in some terms of sort of perpetuity, opposed to, so you're looking beyond the standard.
We are. So it's for the lifetime of the railway. So all the sites that we're creating as part of our mitigation works for the railway will be managed for the lifetime of the railway. So that is a period of, I think it's around 100 years. So that's the operational lifetime of the railway. And as I say, these sites will have conservation covenants attached to the sites to ensure that whoever ends up taking them on will do that. So we'll make sure those outcomes happen.
Okay.
We're still working our way through how that will look. We're a little way off handing land back over to people. Some of these sites we've only created within the last few years, but we're getting some great monitoring data out of them, which, as I say, conservation groups are given the opportunity to look at and comment on. It's just transparency.
Yeah.
And that's basically what I'm trying to knit into all of the biodiversity work we do now, and ecology, natural environment work, is making it available to people. People need to be given the opportunity to see it, to comment on it, to have their say, because these groups know their patches better than I know them. So we need to give them the ability to look at what we're doing and provide feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. So whilst we're talking about BNG and sort of that ecological side, you guys have problems with the BNG metric, don't you?
I think it is not necessarily problems. So we were one of the first projects, I would hazard, within Europe, probably the world, which sounds grandiose, to commit to no net loss in biodiversity. Back in 2013, we committed to that target. That was in the infancy of metrics being developed. So DEFRA produced their initial metric a year or so before that. And since that point, we have been working very closely with Natural England and DEFRA to see how you could apply a metric to a project like HS2. So I guess for the benefit of your audience, in terms of how biodiversity metric works, we're looking at it's a biodiversity very difficult to measure quantifiably. And what this metric attempts to do is create a way of measuring biodiversity by looking at habitats that were there pre-construction and then comparing them broadly to habitats that were there post-construction. And there is a metric which DEFRA and Natural England have developed to do this. This is developed over time. It's got a number of factors that play into it. And it's still developing now. It's not fixed yet. And I think the challenge for a project like HS2 is we have a fixed boundary with a changing metric. Our ability to respond to a changing metric is limited. And also, has the metric been developed with projects like HS2, the size and scale of HS2 in mind? Maybe not. And these are the challenging questions. And I think we can, and we are, playing an active role in helping Natural England look at the answers to some of these questions. But it's not easy because, as I say, you put our numbers through the metric and it can change depending on what version of the metric we look at. But what we are committed to is using a metric to measure our progress in this space. We are doing everything we can to get into a positive position for biodiversity. Later this year, the end of this year, autumn time, we're going to launch our Biodiversity Action Plan, which will publicly show the actions we'll take to move the project as a whole towards sort of a net gain, at least up to a no net loss position for phase 1 and 2A, into a net gain for phase 2. So that's the plan.
So is that across the whole project, or is that specific to each of those legs?
So on phase 1, we have a position of achieving no net loss. On phase 2A, our position is no net loss, but we are seeing what we can do to sort of further that into net gain position. And then for phase 2B, we have committed to a 10% net gain. So those slightly different targets are really reflective of the ability of the project to do more. Like to set a 10% net gain target on phase 1 would be very challenging, given the fact, as I say, the line is fixed, the habitats are being put in. Our ability to work to a 10% target would be quite limited. But we are, as I say, looking at what we can do. My ambition is to do as much as we can on every phase. And key to that, as I've said at the beginning, partnership working. We need partners. We're looking for people all the time to partner up with. If people have land opportunities, people have, management, want to manage some of our sites in the long term for that 30-year period that we need for BNG, for units to be counted. They're some of the areas that my team are looking into currently. Yeah.
Okay. So just to clarify a couple of quick things. So with regard to the BNG net gain, so biodiversity net gain, why is it that the earlier, so I kind of know why this works, but for the audience, why is it that the earlier phases don't have to meet that 10% requirement?
Yeah, so HS2 as a project is not captured. Obviously, the requirement for any project now to achieve BNG is enacted through the Environment Act. which will come into effect at the end of this year.
Yeah, November.
Yeah, exactly. So HS2 as a whole project is actually exempt from that. So what we are doing in this space is voluntary. These are ambitions that we have put in place voluntarily as a company. So, they are ambitious targets because, I guess, stepping back just from the biodiversity space, we have other stakeholders that we need to consider. We have landowners, we have communities that we go through. We have to think about how we impact them. Farmers. Can we justify taking more of somebody's livelihood, their field, in order to deliver against a target? This is where the challenge for me and my team is to find the opportunities to deliver more biodiversity units sympathetically to the communities that we are affecting, and that's the real challenge there.
Yeah. So I guess that begs the question as to why you guys. I mean, again, I understand that you're exempt and the project is kind of already going ahead in terms of phase one because it's already being built.
Yes.
But do you think there'll be some sort of review where actually it's looked at, will HS2 look to offset some of its impact from phase one potentially? So that would be off-site interventions through the sort of emerging biodiversity credit market, because obviously this market is also new and fledgling.
Yes.
And HS2's having potentially having a very big potential impact there. Yeah. Is that something that you think will be looked at, or is unlikely to be looked at for the sort of first phase?
We want to maximise the biodiversity units from that land. Our contractors are doing some amazing innovations to sort of bring forward more units within the land take that we have. So that's the first port of call. But yes, of course, the off-site opportunities will have to come into play. As you say, very immature market. The biodiversity unit market is very variable. We've had lots of conversations with players in this space who offer units, and the value of those units can differ tenfold. So we're finding our feet in this space like any other project is. Obviously, our baseline biodiversity unit position is much higher than a lot of projects. We've got thousands of units in our baseline compared to the average development, which I'm sure is probably in single digits, a lot of developments. So it's an order of magnitude different, although the fundamentals are the same. We are just slightly constrained in terms of what we can do because, of course, our boundaries are set. So again, opportunities, partnerships will need to come forward to deliver them. We don't want to buy more land, but we would want to support people who maybe want to create new habitats on their land. Maybe we can provide some facility to do that. It's trying to work our way through it like any other project does. But the aspiration is there, and as I say, it's a changing landscape with the metrics still not completely locked down. We've done a lot of good work with Natural England to support that, but there is part of me that thinks maybe a separate metric is needed for large infrastructure projects. Maybe that needs to be considered in the future. But again, I think that's the power of a project like HS2, is that we can aid in that wider understanding. We can provide, those lessons and, hopefully a case study as to why that might be needed. We're not going to be the last big infrastructure project the country has, and it's just finding the way that biodiversity net gain can sit alongside a project like ours. Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of those partners and funding those sort of opportunities then, so is that limited sort of geographically to the more or less in line with the line, so to speak? Because you've got the Green Corridor Initiative as well, which is the large sort of woodland planting scheme, isn't it?
Yes.
Or maybe that's part of it.
It is part of it, yeah.
Is that how geographically constrained to sort of the route is that?
Yeah, so you mentioned the Green Corridor Ambition. So this was our initiative that was launched a couple of years ago now. And basically, it's got two prongs attached to it. So that's looking at the works that we're delivering within our line of route, but then also looking at what we can deliver in the wider landscape, the communities that lie alongside our route. So through the various funding pots that we have and through the sort of partnership opportunities that they bring forward. So that is this Green Corridor spine, I guess, along the railway. And we've got mechanisms for people to get involved in that and to support their projects. So we've got a community and environment fund. If I use phase one as an example, because that is what is most developed, we have a £40 million community and environment fund designed to help communities support their local projects. We've spent around £13 million of that currently on green projects, which are sort of restoring nature reserves, community centres, all sorts of things which the local community bring forward. And that's a way in which communities can get involved. We also have other funds that are specific to local areas. We've also, and things like the HS2 Woodland Fund, which £5 million fund on phase 1. And we've spent a couple of £1 million of that, and it's currently open. We've just reopened it. We've merged it actually recently with the English Woodland Creation Offer. So we're trying to, we found that our fund will be better off merged with the English Woodland Creation Offer in order to make it, I guess, best fitted to supporting woodland creation because of the criteria of that fund. So they knit together quite well. Okay. So we have mechanisms for communities to get involved with. In terms of geographical distance, the funds have different criteria. Some of them you need to, whoever applies would need to demonstrate some level of being affected by HS2, but for the Woodland Fund, it's a 25-mile radius from the line of route, so 25 miles out, which actually, if you look at the country, that takes in quite a lot of the southeast and also the Midlands in terms of woodlands that could be, woodland projects that could be supported in those areas.
Okay.
So there are mechanisms to make this happen, as I say. Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting. Do you have any other sort of community projects that are sort of ongoing, or any other examples of like the community engagement side that are sort of going on? Have you got much going on in the cities themselves?
In the cities themselves, we... that's a good question. Nothing that immediately springs to mind. I'd have to look it up.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Because the other big question I had really was around sort of cities and the impact that HS2 is having with them, because obviously they're having to come into the cities.
Yes.
Birmingham, it sort of skirts around the north-east, doesn't it, before coming down to the east side sort of area where it is. But a lot of those areas tend to be quite, at least in Birmingham anyway, I can't speak for all the other cities, but in Birmingham, a lot of the surrounding area is quite derelict within the city. So it seems like quite a good opportunity to try and regenerate as much of the city as possible. And I know where the station is going, that's a major sort of regeneration project, but actually surrounding that, there's a lot of other areas that are quite dilapidated or in need of some TLC.
And I'm sure that we have a very active community engagement team. We've got a very active funds team, and I'm sure they've done a lot of work in these spaces. But I off the top of my head, I can't think of what they've done.
No, that's okay. That's okay. And then the other thing really was just to touch on, which is a point I like to try and make whenever I talk to anyone about ecology or BNG or anything like that, which is around sort of how these things are measured within cities. Because personally, I don't see BNG really being a viable metric for cities. I just think, a lot of areas that are going to be looked at in cities are going to have either none or a very low BNG baseline. So you're better off at using things like the urban greening factor or something like that as a metric to understand how we're actually going to enhance and have an impact in cities. So is that something that's been considered at all for HS2? Because obviously some of HS2 in phase 1, although it predates the urban greening factor for there, but have you guys looked at using that kind of metric for any of the other cities or upcoming projects? Because I know, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I've talked to a number of city officials from Birmingham, for instance, that are looking at whether or not to implement an urban greening factor instead or alongside biodiversity net gain to actually try and deliver within the city itself, because otherwise it's going to not have the impact that a lot of people think it will.
It's really interesting because it's obviously a lot of this has come into being since we designed the route. But as you say, I think the thing with net gain is that, if you've got an area that has very little biodiversity in the first place, then there isn't the incentive to put biodiversity back within that local area. We have a comprehensive urban design team who have got a plan in terms of ensuring that our stations are, the landscape, planting, etc., is appropriate for the stations and the surrounding areas. But I'm always interested in looking at any other approaches that could be brought forward, bearing in mind, I guess, that we are a publicly funded company and we have limits in terms of how much we can do. But again, it comes back to who can we work with to deliver this? If there is a partner that we can work with, then great. If there's a site where they need some planting and we've got some trees, then wonderful. Or we can maybe provide one of our sites as a test bed for maybe a pilot study for something, then wonderful. There's other approaches, of course, like there's the whole ecosystem services and natural capital accounting. There's other approaches that as a project, we are looking at, but obviously we've gone through the environmental impact assessment route, the ECIA, the regulations there, and we've got this very challenging target of applying a biodiversity metric, which is challenging. I think we can't lose sight of the fact that no net loss. It sounds like a 0%. It sounds like a very basic target for a project like HS2. It's very challenging, and we measure it route wide, of course. So. We've got areas like urban areas where we aren't affecting a lot of biodiversity, but then, some of our route is going through some very challenging countryside. So, that's weighing it up between the two is complicated.
Yeah, I remember reading somewhere about the costs of avoiding some of the key sites, because a lot of the tunnels were extended, weren't they, as well, to try and mitigate the impact, as you already mentioned, on AONBs and things, as well as some ecological sites. But the cost of doing that is significant. So then it kind of, as you say, it's, with all of these things, and ecology especially, there does also always become this kind of weighing up of public money versus environmental ambition, I suppose.
And we've got over 60 miles of tunnels. The project isn't shy in using tunnels, but as you say, they need to be, where they are used has been very carefully considered with the cost element. And of course, you put in a tunnel, you might avoid some biodiversity or natural environment on the surface, but putting in a tunnel does have a cost in terms of carbon, and costs in other ways, doesn't it, in terms of the engineering involved in creating that tunnel. So,
and then what happens with all the waste products?
Absolutely, and that's, I guess, coming back to the case study I gave earlier about the Colne Valley Western Slopes, that area in the Chilterns, just outside the South Portal before entering the tunnel. That's where the material is being used. Trying to use that material in a way that benefits the landscape is complicated, because with huge amounts of material being excavated, we don't want to be shifting this all over the country, because there's a carbon footprint attached to that. So incorporating it into our design is one of the challenges, but opportunities as well.
Yeah, that's one of the big interesting discussions that comes out with a lot of the conversations around net zero, because actually a lot of the things such as the recycling of materials, typically, we're in a good place to talk about this, because we're in the Marshall's design space in Birmingham, and we had the head of sustainability on to talk about this, and he was saying essentially that yes, we can be really sustainable and recycle a lot of aggregates and stuff that we've excavated or byproducts or whatever, but actually it pushes up the carbon cost, because reusing it is much more carbon intensive than actually just taking a virgin material. So again, I've said this before in various things I've been to recently, that net zero is a very narrow lens to look at things through. You have to consider many more wider implications and knock-on impacts of things and the trade-offs that have to take place. So it's not always that straightforward in terms of making an environmentally conscious decision. It's not always clear, because depending which angle you look at it from, the solution or options vary quite significantly.
Yeah, and as I think I said at the beginning, finding ways to use less steel, using less concrete. Some of our sites now have precast concrete factories on site to reduce travel in terms of shifting these things around the country, which again helps reduce our footprint. It's finding those innovations to reduce. As I say, we have a very challenging net zero plan, which will be supported then by the Biodiversity Action Plan, which we'll publish later in the autumn, to sort of provide that comprehensive approach in terms of how we are looking to reduce our impact on the climate. Fundamentally, that's what it all comes back to, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're trying to do the best for biodiversity. We're trying to reduce carbon, trying to lessen our impact in terms of climate emissions, and it all plays into the same thing, isn't it? It's all parts of the same circle. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I think that's quite a good point to to end on potentially, because we've talked about quite a range of the issues and things and challenges and opportunities and what you guys are doing.
Yep.
So I guess thank you
No problem.
so much for joining us today to talk about it all.
Thank you.
And I hope I haven't grilled you too much.
No, it's great
And
to get the opportunity.
I hope I've grilled you enough from the view of some other viewers.
Well, hopefully people will be interested in what we're doing. You know, we're trying to make everything more accessible. We're going to relaunch a few of our web pages to make things more clear in terms of what we're doing. And yeah, it's about that transparency.
That's it. And I think if people have got a lot of comments or questions or things that need answering, you know, drop it in the comments of the videos and things, or get in touch, because we're also fairly local to each other, so we could always have a catch up to sort of cover some of those key points or answer any questions maybe.
Yeah, it's a huge topic. I realise we've not touched on lots of things like, you know, some of the work that we do with our protected species licensing and other areas. So there's lots to be discussed.
Okay.
And I'm sure that people will have questions, but I'm always open to fielding some questions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Not a problem.
Sorry to interrupt, but this episode is sponsored by Water Offsets. If you are working on projects where you might need environmental credits, then they are the people to go to. They specialise in not only biodiversity net gain credits, but also water neutrality and nutrient neutrality too. So if you have an estate, a farm, or some other kind of landowner, or interested in that kind of project, then they could really help you find, you know, new ways of funding those projects and diversifying your land and farms, to take you through the whole process. And if you're a developer who's run into problems, then actually they can help provide those credits that you need to unlock your land and get your development done. So check out Water Offsets if you need help with any of those things. Many thanks.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you're interested in finding out more about what HS2 are doing, then make sure to check out their website. And if you or someone you know lives or works along the route, perhaps they might be interested in one of the programs that they've got going on. So make sure to check them out too. Don't forget to subscribe, like and share this podcast series. Maybe your friends and colleagues will like this too, so please, you know, let them know about what we're doing. A huge thank you to our incredible sponsors, Marshalls, Water Offsets and Vectorworks, our kind supporters, Gillian Goodson Design and the Birmingham Botanical Gardens, and of course, NDLA and Monster Don for powering this episode. And a big thank you to David for his time.